Hello, and welcome to the Superversive Sunday Livestream for July the 1st, 2018. I, as always, am your host, Ben Wheeler. Yeah, here alone by myself with the gaunt ghosts of my thoughts, at least 3 mimes, and the entire City Council of Spokane, Washington. I'm sure it's pronounced differently, but it's Spokane. I think that's enough of an explanation. It is a scorcher in the week that's coming up to July the 4th, and man, I hate working in it. But that's okay, because we're in America. Now, I know that you can't hear the eagle screech that happened behind me when I said that, but I want to assure you it was there, and it was beautiful. The American flags just flying everywhere. You know, it's a really great build-up. And honestly, that's all right. You know, we've had a good 240 years. We'll see 250 in a little while. That's always a good, clean, fun time. Yeah, so all the Superversive crowd is at Libertycon right now. They're having a grand old time. Do check out through the Superversive SF website our excellent sales. Chic of Mars is 99 cents right now, and everyone else has put discounts on their work, which is always a fun way to get in new readers with cheap books. I know that if any gold digger would try to entrap me, they would lay out cheap books so that I am distracted as they proceed to rob me horrifically. Joke's on them, though. There's a first edition Conan the Barbarian in there. Anyway, not much else to say about it. My state, other than, yes, this is still America, and July the 4th is coming up. Well, all right, guys, that's all. No, I'm kidding. I want to give you like half an hour of quality content. One of the things that have popped up quite a bit is the people talk about this in live streams all the time, and I don't want to say too much about it because other people say it better than I do. But a lot of people, how to say this right? A lot of people talk about the silencing of America and American themes and Christian themes, because America is inseparable from its Christian heritage. Fight me, but there's that's not controversial. A lot of people talk about sort of how social justice warriors do it. And one of the things that I find interesting is the favoring of July the 4th over Independence Day. And I think that a lot of the same anti-American principles that govern our enemies also govern how they treat Independence Day and whatnot. Now, me, I'm a big fan of Fash Wave, the purple VHS distorted images like the one you see here. And I find it interesting that they themselves sort of eschew specific national borders or identities in favor of the complete white identity, which I don't really agree with, partly because I'm not the same thing as an Italian or a Swede or Pole or Croat, maybe. I'm English, Scottish, and German. And even then, I'm pretty sure the German part of me is just like the weird bits. And then the Scottish part of me makes some weird bits very loud, but the English bits keeps me from doing it all the time. You see, that's how personality works, I'm sure, when it comes to national identity. But a lot of them, very few of them, in fact, focus on America. The best ones do, of course. And there's other ones I'll bring up in about 5 or 10 minutes or so. I need to figure out how to use this thing better, but I never can. And it's a sort of patriotic duty. Ultimately, I think it should go like this: patriotic duty to God, duty to your, why did I say patriotic? Duty to God, duty to family, duty to your nation. I don't mean duty to your family in the sense of joining a tribal gang and beating people to death. because they're not got a different last name or not your cousin or whatever. But in the sense of if your family needs help, you help them. You know, that sort of thing. You know, make dinner for your sick mother or something, or drive a cousin to town. But that's how it is. Like, if you're a soldier, of course, the duty is first to God, then to your nation. God is always paramount over it. And that's another thing these people of all sides don't really get quite yet. The alt-right can only survive as a Christian movement. And uniting all Christians under it, as well as its various nationalistic tendencies. Basically, if the overall organization everyone has agreed to follow is rotten and corrupt, other overall organizations will arise. Whenever Trumpers are falling apart and joining the Democrats, and not that they were ever Republican in the first place, really. Various characters are outed as rhinos in name only. There's, let's see here, hold on. Ooh, let's get Anthony on. And they basically corrupt what's there and cause it to fall apart in a way. I don't know if fall apart is the best word for it, but it corrupts and is no longer able to perform its proper function. Hold on. And because it can't form its proper function, various characters have to create their own things to fulfill the function that was lost. That's classic SJW events, not tactics, because that assumes they have an overall strategy other than corrupt it, but just sort of how it plays out in the long run over the full period of time. Then we have, in the nation, the pressure release is our two-party system. In other words, people join the party that they most agree with. The problem is that neither party really represents the full group of people that they say they represent. Therefore, you have stuff like the alt-right, alt-left, and 1,000 other different groups, preferably without the fasci. Something. Oh, Anthony. Yeah, we're just going to stay in here forever. Stay here with me, no matter how fuzzy it gets. Yeah, the fact that, like, I'm starting to see the fascist idiots start falling away from the alt-right is music to my ears. What's up, Anthony? How are you doing today?
Hi, Ben.
Hello.
Can you hear me, or am I blurry?
I can hear you well enough. You can have a conversation.
Good. I'm literally driving right now. I'm on my lunch at work. Getting coffee.
That bad.
So I have about an hour to drive, get coffee, and come back.
That must be some coffee.
It kills an hour.
Okay.
It's a Dunkin' Donuts $2 latte. That's what I'm making my trek for.
You know what? I'm sure people go after worse things. Hopefully some adventure will befall you and you have an excuse not to go back. That's how I view it.
I have a Dunkin' Donuts literally 2 minutes away from my job, but that doesn't kill a full hour.
Could read a book, man. Or think about America.
What am I, a nerd? Read a book.
Yes. Yes, we are nerds, Anthony. You heard me. I thought we had a collective identity here. I guess not.
Collective. Actually, I'm going to segue. Going to use that as a segue, because the Pulp Rev has been talking a lot about that. The whole nerd culture thing.
Who has been?
So, Yeah, excuse me, because I'm literally jumping in with no context. Again, I just got on my lunch, so if I'm changing the topic entirely from whatever you were talking about.
Just as long as you can tie it back to America.
Tie it back to America. I think I could do that somehow.
That's your challenge.
Probably.
So who was saying it? The Pope?
I think the Pulp Revolution guys were making a big thing about this, about how nerds were basically ruined sci-fi and fantasy. I know that Jeffro Johnson, who was the former Castalia House editor, he did a whole thing on it. Misha Burnett wrote something on it that was getting shared a lot of places. How basically the problem with sci-fi and fantasy is that nerds took it over.
Okay. See,
I think it's a pretty interesting idea.
I think it's an interesting idea too, but I view it as one of those things where nobody fought back, and the nerds just figured out how they look like anyway. Since nerdism is kind of a new thing, especially with the invention of video games and whatnot. Now, there were always like geeks and stuff.
Well, I think part of what changed is that nerd culture. It used to be something where you didn't want to be called a nerd. You know, it was something like if you're a nerd, it's an insult, right?
I get where you're going.
But then nerd culture turned into a thing where it became like a badge of honor. You know, I'm part of nerd culture.
Right.
And, you know, being a nerd used to represent something bad, and it was something that you tried not to be.
It was anti-American. There we go.
Yeah, that's why I was going to do something on for my next Castalia, so plug, next Castalia post. Was going to be on Mob Psycho 100, because I think that Mob is the hero that we all really need right now.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because Mob is a super nerd. He's probably autistic, and I normally don't say that about fictional characters where they don't give you the, Now, Mob is almost like as stereotypic as it gets about not picking up social cues or showing emotions in the proper way and all of that stuff.
Oh, I had a 5 minutes in, but go for it.
And Mob's a wimp, which is another thing. But what's great about Mob is that Mob is all about self-improvement. And whenever he has the opportunity to stay in his bubble and to reinforce his own belief system and convince himself that he's great the way he is, he always chooses to push against that and to try and improve in areas where he's weak. And we see this is pretty inherent to the character of Mob, because we see this all the way from when he's a little kid and he first finds Reagan, his mentor, and he approaches Reagan himself and says, hey, I wanted somebody who could help me out, and I think you might be that guy. You know, Mob is a very proactive character. So Mob, in a lot of ways, we all talk about like how Conan the Barbarian, you know, is the model for a hero that we've lost, which is true.
Yes.
For somebody like John Carter of Mars. And this is all true. Like, it's a model of hero that we've lost from the pulp era that we kind of haven't seen in a really long time. Although in Psych of Mars, you had a character who was pretty similar to that.
Music to my ears.
Your main character in Psych of Mars was pretty, whose name I can't recall right now, but he was pretty John Carter-ish, I think, in a lot of ways.
It was a model, you know. I made him his own flavor with the poetry and the
the
actually
idea
being an action hero.
Yeah, the idea with John Carter too was that like he was a Virginia gentleman almost, and that's something that that was definitely a sense that I got from your character, that he was not only, you know, he was clearly a pretty good fighter and a pretty good action hero, but he was also something of a gentleman. He repeats a few times that he thought of himself as a dandy for a long time.
Oh yeah.
I think,
yeah.
I think you do definitely take some stuff from there, but Mob, I think, is a uniquely good modern hero to have, because in so many ways he pushes back against the typical SJW tropes that we see, like as a specific almost rebuttal to them.
Oh yeah, like seeing through his character and how he interacts with various people. If people try to pressure him, he just kind of like says, "No, thanks," on principle. I view him as a very modern creation compared to some of the stuff I've read in Journeys, where you might get someone smart or whatever, or some scientist in the pulps or before that even, but very few of them are as stubborn or reactive. I'm not really sure how to define him as Mob, because it's when he gets pressured by the thugs from the various societies or by that one ghost who tries to make everyone smile, he like literally his first reaction isn't, well, what's their point of view? It's, I don't like it, I want to leave.
Well, I think part of that is Mob definitely being autistic, that he doesn't really know exactly how his responses are affecting people. Like, you get the impression with the whole thing with the telekinesis club, that whole storyline, that Mob doesn't quite understand how important this is to that one girl. But at the same time, you could also see that Mob is trying to understand it. Like, that's why he talks to Reagan and asks for Reagan's advice, because he's saying, hey, I'm not really sure what to do. And Reagan correctly, by the way, tells Mob, don't do something that you don't want to do just because they're trying to pressure you into it. And I think I mentioned this on Twitter, and it might have been Bradford C. Walker, who's another one of the Pulp Rev memes who just floats in the background. And I think he said it was like a middle finger to nerds everywhere when he picked the Body Improvement Club over the Telekinesis Club.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that actually sounds about right. And I think, yeah, Mob, I don't want to go too much because I'm trying to avoid overpraising the series as a whole and just focusing on Mob as a character, because then I could go into how Reagan is actually a perfect mentor for Mob, even though he's also, a con artist. But sticking with Mob specifically, I mean, Mob is the sort of person who has a very strong moral code, and even under, like you said, under immense pressure, he still does his best not to break it. And when he does break it, instead of slipping into despair, he gets sad, he gets disappointed, he gets frustrated, but he picks himself up and he keeps going and he tries to do better next time.
Oh yeah, I really did appreciate the fact that he chose the Body Improvement Club. Like, beyond the fact that it is a gag, like it is set up as a gag, it is like heartfelt, sort of. Like, I can say that while I didn't make great choices with like eating and exercise and stuff like that, I can say that when I started exercising, the longer that I exercise, my mental state improves. Like, there's the obvious high you get after you perform a great workout, but also, like, the more that you labor, the more that you choose to work hard at something, the better off your mental state becomes. Like when I'm writing, and when I've seen other people like really get into writing, it's that focus. They're not thinking about like personal flaws or whatever their flavor of depression is, or the United States of America, which should be on our thoughts and minds at all times, even, right? It's about what they're doing, not who they are, which can be damaging. Because I think that's the problem with Mom's brother. He's so obsessed with who he is and how he compares to those around him that he doesn't actually do anything until somebody says, here's your latent power, kid. Don't kill anyone with it.
You're breaking up slightly on me. Can you hear me or no?
I can hear you now.
Okay. I think that with Mob, first off, the Body Improvement Club was just a really great bit of writing all around. The way he sets it up, like it's the typical plot line that he's going to turn them down, but then he's going to, you know, later on, he's going to decide he's going to do it, and they'll have wacky adventures. And then he just totally pulls the rug out from under that. But besides that, it's a really neat bit of writing for a lot of reasons. First off, it's the logical conclusion, because what is Mob trying to do? He's trying to break out of his comfort zone, and he's trying to improve himself. And how is the Telekinesis Club going to help him do either of those things? But the Body Improvement Club is going to help him do both of them. And I really, really liked the way that they portrayed the Body Improvement Club after that point. Like, Mob is kidnapped later by the other psychic, and the Body Improvement Club shows up to save him. And then when they get there, like, they're not, you know, in his face going, how could you be such a loser or whatever? They run over and go, are you all right? This guy, don't worry, we're here. And if you think about it again, too, that's what would probably really happen in real life, to be honest. If you're a part of a team, then they're your teammates, they're going to back you up. And of course, Mob is there. Mob is the exact right guy to be in the Body Improvement Club. Like, he is the person that club is really directed towards. Somebody who actually needs to improve his body.
Yep.
So I really appreciated the way that they showed that whole storyline. But yeah, to loop back around on topic, which is the original topic is America. And we're still not there. But going before that, the whole thing on how sci-fi was basically overrun by nerds, and that caused a lot of the problems.
Yep.
And how Jeffro pointed that out. I think that it was somebody on Twitter said, I think you and the SJWs have the same problem, that sci-fi's been overrun by nerds. And it's sort of true and sort of not. I mean, the main difference is that the SJWs never really liked science fiction in the first place. You know, they want to change science fiction. We're talking about going back to what science fiction originally was and meant, which is an entirely different thing.
I mean, Robert E. Howard was a bodybuilder, exercised quite a bit. Like, it's... And I know that Edgar Rice Burroughs and Robert E. Howland and Robert A. Howland. I keep forgetting.
Well, a lot of those people were very worldly sorts of people, and I do sometimes question the idea that you need to be a worldly guy who. I think it was Flannery O'Connor is one of my favorite writers. I think
what you said there. That you need to be
She's
a worldly
the best
guy.
Short story.
No.
Flannery O'Connor is the best short story writer of all time.
Anthony.
She is the best short story writer of all time.
I don't know who she is, but I'm saying that you said you don't have to be a worldly guy too, and then you broke up.
Oh. Yeah, great. This is the connection. I thought you were being a jerk, man.
No, I'm always a jerk, but it sounded like a salient point. And we might have lost him. No?
So, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes.
Nope, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me right now?
Yes, I can hear you right this second.
Okay. This is what I get for while driving to get coffee. What I was going to say is I don't know if I necessarily agree that you need to be a worldly person to be a great writer. But with that said, I think it did provide a perspective on the early pulp era that was very uniquely, and now we could tie it back in, very uniquely American.
Yeah. Eagle cry.
Right. That all of these people had so many experiences to bring into the pulps that it really created an environment that was very interesting, that had a lot of variety that other places didn't have.
It had a flavor of American exceptionalism, when they did talk about America or have American characters, versus, I think, the quasi-American or Earthling exceptionalism that you see in the next generation of sci-fi writers with Asimov and Heinlein. It's a lot different. Like, Heinlein's soldier characters and Americans and stuff like that can't be mistaken except for what he's designed them to be like. But with Asimov's characters, these things are men of science, and they're exceptional Earthlings. But I can't say that they have.
I mean, Asimov didn't. To be honest, Asimov didn't really care about his characters. He was more interested in the vehicles for his ideas and his puzzles.
Yes, but it's still. I think it's still part and parcel to the whole shtick of that era. Like there's the engineer from The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, and then there's Rico, and then there's like a kid character. And honestly, I can't really like distinguish between them. Oh, and the main dude from Stranger in a Strange Land, but he's barely a character, barely.
I mean, the most memorable character, the two most memorable characters in Asimov's entire body of work are Susan Calvin, who he stuck with for a very long time, so that kind of helped, and right. Elijah Bailey, who is literally a stock noir hero.
Love it.
Which is the only, from his robot novels, it's the only reason he's memorable is that he could be a stock character. You could pull him out from anywhere. There's nothing unique about him.
What about Harry Seldon and R. Daniel Olivaw?
R. Daniel Olivaw's personality is robot. It's identical to every other robot in his entire body of work. There is nothing interesting about R. Daniel Olivaw. Nothing.
No pathos for you, Anthony?
No. And I don't hate the character, but I see him for what he is. He's a plot device, you know.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think The Caves of Steel is actually a really great book. It's one of the more clever mysteries that I've read. The ending, the climax, is probably the best thing that Asimov ever wrote.
Oh,
but
I agree.
At the same time, Elijah Bailey is the only character I have any recollection of. And maybe sort of Julius Enderby, the commissioner, but only in very broad strokes. And that's because Bailey is not an original or unique character. He's just kind of, he's the noir hero. That's him. That's Bailey. Because Asimov had no idea how to write characters. He never learned. Nobody ever told him he had to.
Right. And honestly, when you sell like Asimov, nobody needs to. As unfortunate as that is. I was thinking to myself while we were talking about this that, I've been reading the Galaxy's Edge series pretty hard, and they're great books, but they've kind of ruined me for other middle sci-fi, space marine sort of things. Because the characters are often pretty similar across it, and it doesn't really have unique flavors. There's the funny guy, there's the leader, there's the sub-leader, there's the five-man band tropes, and so on and so forth. And I find myself reading the new generation of pulp, sci-fi space marines, just kind of like, I want something fleshy even, new.
I mean, it's kind of it's difficult to do, though. I mean, when I come up with characters for the stories I'm writing, what I do is I very shamelessly steal characters and transplant them to a new scenario. So, I don't know. I'm trying to think of one of the examples that I used. Oh yeah, the main character of Tales of the Once and Future King. I actually named her after the two characters she was based on, which was Maddie Ross from True Grit and Meg Calvin from A Wrinkle in Time. And I just squashed the two together, and that was the character. And I think that's an interesting... I know that's actually fairly common, because I know that Jaji basically did the same thing, El Jaji Lamplighter, for people who aren't aren't just buds like we are on a first name basis.
Mm-hmm.
El Jaji Lamplighter in her Rachel Griffin series basically did the same thing, because it was from a role-playing game where they would just take real characters, stick them in a new setting, and then see how that changed them.
See, for my characters, I usually take tropes that I want them to base around. Like with Harun Rashid, I wanted a Prince of Mars who's a little bit dandy, but can certainly hold himself into in a fight because of how you do have to fight with swords sometimes or guns or whatever you have. And so I didn't really worry about what he was in a unique sense. I wanted to make the archetype of the Arabian prince, and then set him on Mars, and then give him his little flavors that make him fleshed out as best I can. I do that.
Well, I thought the most interesting thing about that character, which I mentioned in my review, I think, and what I thought did the most to differentiate him from other characters of that type was definitely his Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
I think that he was Christian, and it wasn't just something that was there as flavoring, which is important. Sometimes people just use it as as a background detail. Like, he was a Christian. This affected the way he thought and acted. And I think that was definitely a unique, if not a unique, a rare twist on the Arabian Prince trope. Because 99 times out of 100, they're either Muslim or nobody cares, so they don't mention it. And you just assume they're Muslim. Like in Aladdin. He yells praise Allah once, so you're just kind of working under the assumption that they're all Muslims.
Oh, yeah, he does say that.
Which, I'm not even criticizing it. It makes sense. Yeah. It's in Arabia. But I think that you definitely put an interesting spin on it by having somebody from an Arabian culture with a Christian philosophy, if that makes sense.
It does. And one of the hardest parts was to not westernize the Christianity and make him more like a Baptist instead of somebody who has a culturally affected view of Christianity.
I actually go ahead.
Because it's real easy to lose character in Western Christian doctrine, or to overstate some sort of mystical part of Christianity that honestly you probably don't understand and might even be dipping into heresy of a kind. But if you can keep a character, keep his culture, and keep his Christianity, that's a nice little trifecta, I think.
I mean, I do think there's something, I don't know if market's the right word, but there's something of untapped potential in the idea that, the Catholic Church is a very good literary antecedent to draw on because it's so old and has so many rituals and is interesting to look at. But I think that as far as literature goes, there is some untapped potential in looking at the Eastern Christian churches, and how different they are. And I went to, I'm a Catholic. I go to the Catholic Mass, but a couple of times I visited a Divine Liturgy, which is the Byzantine Catholic Mass, and it's basically the equivalent of the Orthodox, the Eastern Orthodox liturgy.
Right.
And I went and visited it, and it was different in some really interesting ways, culturally, and the way that they acted and the way that the Mass was performed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's something that people who add those religions into novels, they always look at it from that very Roman Western viewpoint, which, again, this is actually coming from a Roman Catholic, but they look at it from that viewpoint. But I think there's a whole other side of Christianity that can be explored. And I think you gave it a decent start in your book by exploring how that would look in an Arabian context a little bit. You didn't go deeply into it, but you could get some of the flavor there.
Well, it needed
how
flavor.
It differed.
Yeah. The Arabian setting, and this will sound weird, is all about the texture and flavor, not the depth. You should have some depth in there, but the really people, the ideal situation is more the surrounding bits and the feel of the hot wind on your face, rather than something more philosophical, in my opinion. Not that there should be like no philosophy or depth or anything like that, but I'm saying that if the flavor and the texture is off, whatever you're trying to do with the further depth is just ruined.
Yeah, because a lot of it, I mean, I don't think I've ever read the full 1001 Arabian Nights, but like years ago, I did get through a pretty decent portion of it. And the one thing you get is that it's so confusing and so culturally different that it's hard for you to get a really solid idea of the culture, but you get a very strong feel for the culture. And that's what people are looking for when they read Arabesque fiction. Not so much an exact replica, but they want to read it and think, oh yeah, this feels like I'm reading Arabian Nights.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm going to give a shout out to Bradford Walker, who's in the chat. Something about a crowdfunding relaunch. Hope that goes well for you, buddy. I think this is my hope for the Pulp Rev. I think we're still in the early stages of it. And of course, the shutdown of Amazon would be just devastating. But if we survive into the future, I really hope we see more variety. Like variety is a thing I want more than anything else. I'm not a genre reader. I don't read every fantasy book. I don't read every sci-fi or steampunk or whatever. So when Nick Cole talks about genre readers, it's like, whoops, that's not me there.
Well, here's the funny thing. I ended up getting a sort of kind of reputation in the Pulp Rev circles from old Castalia posts. So I was like a defender of genre, which is a little bit hilarious because the books I write, I mean, one of them was an Asimov pastiche, but it was intentionally a pastiche, so that's a little bit different. But
God Robot?
Or homage. I think homage is the better word. It was like an Asimov homage. Yeah, that was God Robot. But like Tales of the Once and Future King, I went into it with no clear idea of I'm going to emulate this or that. I wanted to do a post-apocalyptic Western about the return of King Arthur. And there was no real idea in my head of, it's not going to fit perfectly into sci-fi or it's not going to fit perfectly into fantasy. It was just about creating the world that made the most sense for my characters. So I think it's a little funny that I ended up getting something of a reputation as like a defender of genre limitations when that's really not what I am at all. But with that said, I do think that there is a value in genre that sometimes some of them overlook. Like the fact is that there are people I know who do not like fantasy but do like adventure fiction, or do not like science fiction but do like fantasy, or specifically look for epic fantasies. And the idea that those are going to always exist and there's nothing wrong with that.
But
and then I think,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I feel that with the fantasy versus sci-fi and all that genre gunk, that I think people use genre as an excuse for lack of quality in it. That it's like an epic fantasy. Is it a Tolkien ripoff? Well, we don't use ripoff, and other things and things like that. And of course, I'm being a little sarcastic with it. But to me, I can't read generic fantasy or sci-fi or Space Marine or anything like that. Like there's quite a few Space Marine games that are popping up on Steam and other places where you're this big tank of a character and you blow your way through it, or you're a silly guy and you have various tricks that you can do and it's about breaking the game's physics. But the thing is that there's still Warhammer 40k Space Marine, Just Cause 4, and Just Cause series, and like Saints Row, and those are like the epitomes of the things I just described. And with science fiction, it's the same sort of way. If you want men with wrenches, guess what? The Moon is a Harsh Mistress is probably better than anything you'll ever do, unless you get really good. or steampunk. There's Agatha Heterodyne, Girl Genius, which is great in novel form, and even though the first one's a little dry because I didn't know what their voice was for novels then, or web comics, like so on and so forth. If we want urban fantasy gun porn, there's Larry Correa's Monster Hunter series. Or if you want more wizarding, there's the Dresden Files. Like, we can talk about genres, or we can fight against genres or anything like that. But the sad fact is genres do exist and they help sell. And for Seven Siblings, which I'm renaming Tears of Elfland, it's going to be fantasy. It's going to be fantasy adventure, and I'm going to really hit, even though it's pulpy. Like, I've got a guy fist fighting a minotaur while his greaser girlfriend's trying to strangle the thing. Like, it's not that I'm portraying it entirely in a good light, because it's about part of character motivations. But that's how I'm going to do it. I've got this gothic horror novel I'm plotting out right now that I'm not going to write for like a year or something. But when I release it, I'm going to tell Jason, the only way this is going to survive is this is my attempt at superversive gothic horror. It needs to be the full like horror. Jason Rennie is our publisher, by the way. It needs that full horror treatment. Otherwise, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, I think when I came up with, and I keep going back to Tales of the Once and Future King and the characters in that, because that's like, that world and the characters in it are the ones I'm really concerned with now. But there was also an idea that I was working on for that was originally going to be an urban superhero story that I had an idea in the vein of Daredevil. That was going to be like a medieval knight in inner city New Jersey. And then I started plotting it out and coming up with ideas. And eventually it turned into the current version of the story, which is not written yet, but as I kept changing ideas. And the current version of the story is now like a detective thriller, and the medieval knight is a side character. And he's going up against a mind-reading vampire.
Right.
And it was just like, none of this was ever driven in my head by, I need to write the perfect superhero story or urban fantasy or whatever. It was just all, what is really cool? Oh, I know. And some of it was also, everything is influenced by what I'm watching or reading or writing at the time. And then after some time has passed, I look back and I go, okay, is that influence actually a good thing, or should I take it out? And in this case, it was definitely influenced a little by some thrillers and things that I was watching that I really liked the idea of having a mind game between a detective and a villain, which was not originally there in the superhero version of the story.
Well, I
added a femme fatale love interest, because you got to have a femme fatale love interest in a detective story.
A femme fatale love interest, not in a detective story, is like having your roughnecks without toothpicks. It just doesn't work.
I mean, it's in inner city New Jersey, and it's a noir style detective story in inner city New Jersey. Right. You gotta have.
No, I get you. I'm just being so.
I live in New Jersey, but our cities suck. Our cities just suck. There's no way around it. There's no explaining it away. They're the worst.
Yeah, it's like, I would never want to live in California, New Jersey, or Massachusetts. No, thank you.
I'll defend New Jersey a little bit in that the cities are actually a relatively small part of the state. Right now, I'm standing at the Dunkin' Donuts, and I'm looking across the street at like mountains of farmland and green trees and skies. With that said, with our new idiot governor, they're about to ruin the state even more. So maybe you're right. Just avoid us.
Yeah, just this is what I recommend to everyone. Just come to Missouri. The living's cheap, the land is cheap, and the people are friendly, and we know how to drive. It's one of those things where just leave. But whatever. The Bradford Walker makes a great comment. Ever notice the sort of people who tut adventure fiction tend to be those often impaled on Conan's sword? And it's like, oh, yes, you're right. Now, full disclosure, I am vehemently against killing people who displease me in my novels.
Killing people who just.
Okay.
Okay.
Like you write in a person like Sally from HR, and then she dies in an Orcish raid.
I don't know. It just doesn't really feel right to me. I feel like I'm forcing something in that's not there. Honestly, it never really occurs to me.
Oh yeah,
because I'm just like, why? You're not a character. Why am I going to add you in? You're not there.
Yep.
It just feels kind of dumb to me.
Now, I won't name names or anything like that, but I recently helped Jason out with some reading some novels that had been submitted. And one of the things I noticed with it was that the person, now it had a lot of flaws in it that I communicated to the person in a respectful manner, of course. But one of the flaws in it is that I could clearly tell that these were people that the author personally hated, that he was treating poorly within his novels. And it was one of the reasons why I said, that Jason should not pick up these books. Now, of course, I also gave the guy reasons too, and why. And I did it with all the gravitas it deserved. But you can tell. You can tell how it is, and it does affect the reader poorly, I think.
I changed my tune on criticism a little bit after reading some stuff by Vox and then by John Delarose. That I used to be in the camp of, if you're going to put something out there, even if you're an ally, you got to expect criticism. But I changed my tune and realized that if we're in the middle of a culture war, and these people are my allies, and I'm not doing anybody any good by bashing their stuff, because originally there was a thing a while back that actually kind of spread over a few blogs and things in the pulp revolution scene on Superversive, where I criticized a book by Raul Nienzi, who wrote his book Sword and Flower. And
Sure.
First off, the reason I thought it was fair game was because he had just written an absolutely scathing review of Forbidden Thoughts, so I want to point that out, but
I don't care too much. like when it comes to internet drama.
The point I'm making here is that now in retrospect, I wouldn't do that in public. I would probably contact the author in private. If I knew them and I wanted to make a point, I would contact them and say, hey, this is where I thought you went wrong.
You see, my philosophy on it is I don't mind public criticism. I view criticism not quite as art, but as tangentially. What is this? How am I? I'm trying to change the name of it while I'm talking about this. I view criticism as almost an art form in and of itself, and that good criticism is always valuable. Partially because I want criticism of my own work and welcome it. I do not take criticism personally unless the criticism is bad. Bradford Walker have taken out Vox's policy, criticize allies privately, stand with allies in public. Absolutely. I make no bones about it that I do not always appreciate John Delarose's steampunk works or his novels. However, I will never give him a bad review on Amazon, and I will never go like, this is crap because of whatever. If anyone asks me, I would say that John Delarose is the leading Hispanic voice in science fiction. At no point will I take an action that I perceive as being harmful in a meaningful way to John Delarose or his profit margins or his reception to books. But that does not mean I won't publicly put constructive criticism on my personal blog, which I've abandoned for months now. And thus no one will ever see it. I mostly write it just for me. And also in the sense of trying to, like, it's like this. I am not responsible for anything anyone else writes, but at no point in time do I want anyone to say, well, Ben, you don't give advice anyway, you know, or anything like that. It's like, it's hard for me to describe this. Like, when I came across that guy's work, who I reviewed for Jason Rennie, whether to publish it, I basically say, okay, man, you need to take out the sex scene. The sex scene doesn't add anything. It's in the first chapter, and I just don't care about it. It doesn't add anything to their characters. And so, like, and I'll never actually put up what I said or who it was in public. This is just so you know. Like, this is fairly private. But it's one of those things where I made it clear what my philosophy of the sex scene was, why it was bad, and how he can improve his writing so that it would be publishable by Superversive Press. I don't think he'll show up again, but it's one of those things where there's careful examination of the tropes the guy wrote into his story, and then a re-examination in a way that he can use to improve it. Which it's one of those things where I gain no monetary benefit. I always buy the books anyway. Like, I haven't finished Stars Entwined, but I'm not going to be like, you know, yo, JDA, I need a refund. You know, even if you don't like need it, just buy the books. For John De La Rosa, I've actually started talking to him privately about things.
I like John's Gravity of the Game well enough because I'm a baseball fan. I didn't think it was the best novella in the world, but I thought it was almost like an Easter egg for baseball fans. And
oh, absolutely.
When I was reading his steampunk novel, what's it called again? I'm blanking on it.
It's
I don't know.
For Steam and Country.
I'm blank. Yeah, for Steam and Country. Thank you.
That's right.
And I think I got halfway through that, and I didn't stop because I was bored. I just stopped because I got distracted, and sometimes I'll stop reading, like The Lord of the Rings, halfway through if I get distracted. But I do remember, yeah, whatever. But I do remember thinking when I was halfway through, like, I don't know if this is exactly my type of story, something with the female-led protagonist, and the way that she interacted with the male lead, then I'm like, maybe I could see this maybe being good for a younger set of readers, but it's not my thing. But with that said, James,
I hate him so much.
I hate the nickname Zerbear. That is the one thing I'll say I'll hate. That is the one thing. John De La Rose, if you ever hear this is the only strong criticism you will ever hear me make publicly. The nickname Zerbear needs to die. It needs to die.
James needs to die.
It makes me cringe every time I read it. Okay, that's it. That's it. Now,
criticism. Yeah. We've tarred Feather him so much. I am going to write my own steampunk novel at some point. I'm going to call it Dr. Steam Cannon. It's going to have a dude on the cover. No romance whatsoever. It's just, and like the main thrust of it is he's like an agent for the Queen Victoria or whatever, sitting on her eternal iron throne. But whatever. For the sun never sets on her empire. And investigating a mystery that's basically ripped straight from Fast and Furious 5, Fast 5, where they're basically airlifting safes out with Zeppelins. Yeah, it's going to be pretty sweet. No romance. The dude's already going to be married. They're going to have a loving relationship. There's no third wheels. Maybe I'll throw in a robot maid. I don't know. I haven't decided yet.
As far as steampunks go, I've noticed that I almost like the idea more than I like the execution normally. I mean, there's a cool little game called 80 Days that's like a steampunk adventure game in the vein of Around the World in 80 Days. Yeah. And, it's like text-based. You make decisions. That was a fun game. It had some SJW elements, but mostly it was a pretty fun game.
You see, there's like...
Most things have it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was thinking to myself, like, there's some really great steampunk out there, and a lot of it is on the liberal side of things. But, like, Agatha Heterodyne, Girl Genius, there's Arcadia Snips and the Steamwork Consortium, which is one of the funniest books I've ever read. like there's this repeating gag where like this fellow who can't speak, but his friend can understand him perfectly. Like it makes this statement that's just because he has no chin to speak with, and the guy goes, "Yeah, that's right. Voting is a poor way to choose your monarch. You know, I love our, you know, like, and it's like a political discussion that they're having that we only understand one side of it. But apparently his friend, despite being like one of the two thugs of the main villain, you know, is very erudite on, and his friend consistently comments on it. I just find it very funny every time. I think there's some elements of steampunk, especially in comedy, romance, and the general sort of like adventure that it can really go for. However, I think most authors who are willing to work with the hard to work with clay that is steampunk tend to fall into how we should say SJW isms. Like for all of my,
well,
you know,
I think it's because steampunk, and this is my theory. I have no proof of this, but this is my theory on why this happens a lot with steampunk. Steampunk is already not rooted in real science, right? It's literally impossible to root steampunk in real science. We already know that the world didn't work out that way.
Yes.
So, however, it is really, really cool looking. So, if you are going to write something set in a steampunk world, you can ignore basic factual accuracy as much as you want. You can completely ignore it and then turn it into whatever sort of allegory you want to and put no effort into the rest of the novel and call it steampunk because you add an airship.
Hey, I like it. Though you are right. And honestly, it'd be one of those things where the science is more arcane than it is, shall we say, realistic.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I don't hate steampunk by any means. Like I said, I like the 80 Days game. I mean, if you count Miyazaki's Castle in the Sky as steampunk, which I guess I would. I mean, I love Castle in the Sky.
It's more diesel punk.
I think that you're getting into subcategories there that are kind of close together, but you know.
Maybe like the thing is, I've actually read quite a bit of diesel punk, so maybe it's exaggerated in my mind. But I do view it that while it does have strong steampunk elements, especially in the beginning, by the end of it, it's firmly within diesel punk territory. The engines are not steam, I should say.
I mean, I think the reason I think steampunk is because they're flying on gigantic airships that look like blimps and are actually battleships. And while it might be diesel punk technically, everybody who's going to watch that movie is going to connect airships with steampunk. Well, whatever. Now, I'm arguing with nothing because it really doesn't matter. Who cares?
That's how we learn. We argue with people and then refuse to admit we're wrong. But
also, I should probably go because at this point I'm going to be back to my lunch at least 10 minutes late. And while I don't really care, people are going to start getting mad at me.
You can stay on as long as you want, Anthony. I'll probably, you know, like that's between you and whoever. Let's see here. One of the things that
I'm going to be out. I'm going to get out for now, though. Thank you for having me.
No problem, Anthony. You're always welcome. See you later. And maybe. Yeah, looks like he's still around. Whatever. So, I'll pontificate a bit for a moment. I think one of the goals of Pulp Rev, though, you know, I'm not any sort of demagogue or anything like that, should be to expand the horizons of Pulp Rev as far and as fast as possible with what's written. Space Marine fiction does sell, and I'm not saying give up money, but I think that the genre won't grow unless people seek out new ways to perform it. And maybe it's just the fact that I've studied art in and of itself through paintings, through the quality of the literature that I do read. You know, like as a kid, my mother would like teach me and my sister French, and she would give us packets on Monet and the French Impressionistic painter, and we would go to the art museum several times a year. We would, while she wouldn't like say, Ben, what's this novel mean? She would make sure that what we do read is of quality, and that's something that I keep to this day. Because like, here's the thing: I'm going to die someday. You're going to die someday. And it's like eating McDonald's. Let's say that you're eating McDonald's and hold on a second. What's up, David? Let's say you're eating McDonald's and right there you have a heart attack. Why did you have a heart attack? Because you were eating McDonald's. But the second thing is you're going to come up to the pearly gates, and St. Peter's going to be like, choked on a chicken nugget, eh? It's pretty common, isn't it? You're going to feel so silly. How'd you die? Well, I was martyred for my faith. Oh, I was performing, some great deed in Nicaragua, helping build such and such a canal. I was eating a chicken nugget and it went down the wrong tube and got stuck there. I mean, no one's going to judge you. It's heaven. But, it's the same sort of idea. The life that we live is finite, and the choices that we can make are finite by definition. The effects of those choices can go beyond us. That's one of the reasons why I want to write, is that I can leave an impression on this world that isn't some guy playing video games until his butt rots off, which I've heard of. Or expanded out into 500 pounds because he didn't understand what self-esteem was. We can choose to improve ourselves, like Mob Psycho 100 choosing the club over his personal desires and his personal ease. Let's see. Art has the ability to redeem life. Actually, I don't think I want this image. The image I want is actually something that says duty above pleasure. And while it's, you can read whatever you want, and there's no angel's going to slap, a book out of your, here we go. No angel's going to slap a book out of your hands or anything like that. But if we read the same fiction and we write the same fiction, we're going to start creating the same fiction forever, and it doesn't grow anything. Conan the Barbarian is the epitome of the sword and sorcerer genre. There's no one better in my mind. There's Bran MacMorn and Cole the Conqueror within the same genre, and Cole the Conqueror, I think he was of Atlantis, is still less of a thing than Conan the Barbarian himself. We can write all the Conan the Barbarian we want. Nick Cole says, tells us straight up, and he's right, I believe, that you can write a story about Conan the Barbarian riding into town, killing everyone, riding off with the women and the treasure. And he's being a little silly with it, but the idea is the same. Tyrus Rex of Galaxy's Edge is Conan the Barbarian with a hand cannon, and it's amazing. It's awesome. But yes, Cole Brand, Solomon Kane, all by the same man. Yes, absolutely, and that's why I made the comparison. I should have made that more clear. Tyrus Rex is amazing. Then we have Anson Keel and that other fellow who's the last remaining Black Legionnaire, essentially. And then there's the fella who captured a ship with a welding torch, all within the same world. And now when I'm reading Renegade Star, and I'm just sort of like chugging my way through it, but the problem is in the back of my head, I still have Anson Keel with his absolutely amazing, Paul and Ravi quoting him the odds of how he can kill everyone and get away with it with all the money, for whatever reason, mysterious reasons he has, with that beautiful alien, quote unquote, princess. That just continues on. Much like today's sermon, which kinds of treasure are we storing up? Absolutely. That's David in a Discord chat. I'm reading Renegade Star. It's got some interesting elements. I'm not disgusted with the quality or anything like that, but I'm not enjoying it because it is yet to do something I consider truly interesting. The cloak that the ship has is interesting. You know, the debt that he has to various warlords is interesting. And the fact that they're going on an expedition of a religious significance to various other characters is interesting. But the main character himself, who is supposed to drive the plot, or in this case, ship the plot through the hyperspace lanes, isn't enough to grip me. I've seen Girls with Tattoos to Maps before. That's the plot of Waterworld. I've seen, and Treasure Planet, kind of, and Titan AE. Man, I love those movies. Unironically, Titan AE was a great movie. Then we have Battle Nuns. That's been done. It's never been done well. I hope it works well. We have various geeky engineer types who younger men than me can sort of like latch onto and press ourselves on. You know, who will certainly grow through a character arc that will involve him killing somebody. We have a pair of scientists who have death flags written all over them. So on, because they're not very interesting, so on and so forth. Like I could go on with it. Like, I'm not criticizing Renegade Star in and of itself. Like, if you think that I'm saying it's bad, no, it's well written. What I am saying is that the things I am looking for as a reader aren't there like I want them to be. Let's see here. John C. Wright told me Titan AE may have been the worst movie he ever saw. No, don't tell me this. He has to be lying. He can't have that kind of taste. Titan AE was amazing. Oh, well, that's okay. I'm still going to try and mimic his work. Actually, that brings up a good thing. Why do I like John C. Wright's works almost just out the gate for no reason? And that's the simple reason, is that his vision is absolutely astounding and out of the thing. John C. Wright also loved Gurren Lagann until the very end. Oh yes, that's a true statement though. I'm not sure how to respond to that, Bradford. What was I saying? Right, there's a vision to him that's absolutely astounding and hasn't been matched by anyone else. I might try. I'm writing a story. I'm editing it right now called Jasper Silver and the Escape from Earth. It's about a kid who's turned into a nanotechnological robot and has gray goo powers and stuff like that. Weak to electricity and fire, but otherwise indestructible. And I'm trying to build up to that John C. Wright peak where, like, people are literally clusters of stars and fights go through a billion years. Now, I'm exaggerating that, what I planned for it. We meet the Martian princess. He's married. Second book. By the way, Jasper Silver shows up in the background of Sheik of Mars as, like, that's the wedding the story's being told in. Remember, it goes wedding, wedding speech, guy recording it, and then the actual events. And then I actually go one layer deeper into what happened to Zira Rashid while she was hiding in the harem. But that's neither here nor there, because I want to build it up. Like, Jasper Silver in the end will be wrestling with giants on Charon, the moon of Pluto, over the fate of a warp gate to Alpha Centauri. Like that's like the finale I want of one of the books, or having another character in his mech chased by Medusas, who I will do right, I swear to goodness, into the great dark spot of Neptune. Deja Thoris. Ooh. But I still have to get there. I still have to have the build up, and I still have to make sure that the books I'm writing are excellent. I could write a dumb Space Marine book where there's a princess and then there's a guy in an almost indestructible armor suit. In fact, I'll plot one up right now. Marine is disgraced after a politically incorrect move is made on national television during an aid mission to space Afghanistan. He is stripped of his rank and forced into bodyguard labor to make ends meet because he basically went from high school to soldier, and he never really learned anything but how to be a really good soldier. And he kind of feels dumb about not taking like certain technical classes that were always offered, that I know are offered to various people. Like I've got a friend who's in the Navy, and the dude knows how to fix helicopters. Like, you know. Like he's like, well, I feel pretty silly. He's hired by the king of the space land, king of Albion, we'll say, to protect his daughter. In fact, I think I'm riffing kind of off of Corey's work, which I forget the name of, that was set in space, but that's neither here nor there. Unconscious. It's unconscious until I mentioned it. Now it's conscious. Basically, over the course of it. In fact, I'm going to make it my own thing. Like the princess actually gets kidnapped because I'm a talentless hack, and he goes after her. He hijacks because he's imprisoned for his life because they believe he's a conspirator. He has to break out of prison, fight some people who I characterized as his friends earlier, because I'm not a complete hack, and then he gets, including one who will come back as a recurring boss for the guy to fight. Because he's also a dedicated professional, and he invades a war. He finds his old suit of armor, or a new suit of armor that does the same thing after he crash lands onto an abandoned military base from the ancients, and then has to allow himself to get captured so he can get back his ship. He escapes his capturers, takes over the ship, figures out where the princess is. And then we have a bang-up 3/4 to ending action scene of him mowing down pirates of various interesting flavors until the book ends and he finds the princess. That's basically a more advanced version of Tyrus Rex's story combined with Corey's thing that he had in Astounding Frontiers. And if I wasn't doing this by myself, I'd have the other guy take over and I could get it, but whatever. And I'm not saying this to criticize the Space Marine genre. I'm just saying that it's possible to write a viable Space Marine story and then not really do anything with it, not really advance the genre, not really expand into the Superversive Daughter of Soul, Corey McCleary's Daughter of Soul, which I can't wait for it to be released because I want to see the end of that. But I'm sure he's working on something else, maybe. It's annoying in a sense to be to see these things, to see these talented works, but it's all just Space Marines and robots, and it just feels the same. However, I've got really great hopes for the future, and I will never stop doing things to help improve my fellow writer. Yeah, I really hope to see what the next part of the Tyrus Rex thing that Galaxy's Edge are releasing, which is called Chasing the Dragon, which might be a song reference, which I personally hold very dear to my heart because it's about heroin overdosing or drug overdosing in a general sense. And RIP to everyone, I think. RIP to everyone we know. There's a great little piece in it called he's itching the kitchen, he's making decision he wanted to scratch. Chasing the dragon, not facing the dragon is not something that he wanted to catch. And then it goes on about how the guy wonders about how he died. There's got to be some heart to it. That's why I started looking at the old song, making up the matters of Britain and France. Absolutely. Heart is a powerful thing. if you do it right. I like to think that I did it in Sheik of Mars and in Tears of Elfland, and I think that's what's missing from Jasper Silver. But I'm still working on that one. It's actually like this is my third rewrite of it, so I'll just chug on until it's done. And with Sheik of Mars, I actually wrote in and read up on Arabian poetry and got their meter. Blues, Ben. The blues will teach you to write the blues. Oh, absolutely. I wrote Sheik of Mars in one of the worst years of my life. I understand the wonderful writing powers of crippling depression and joblessness. But that's neither here nor there. I hope that the genre continues to grow, the pulp genre. I can't wait to see more better Conan the Barbarian stuff. I think, like I said to Anthony, we're still very early in it. I still think there's a lot more for us to reach for, to grow into. And I don't think it'll ever end. Like, I view us as having reset the clock on what our works look like. We don't really remember most of what the 1880s and so on, 1850s released, but we remember Fantasties and Dickens and the beginnings of Verne and H.G. Wells, and even then, most of their stuff, I can't read it. It's not as good as some people like to say. In my mind, it's I don't know. I think it was just because it was the only kind of thing that existed of its kind, but still, first and greatest is one of the things I like to think about that. And so now we have an opportunity to become the new Robert E. Howards, the new Robert Heinleins and Isaac Asimovs, except without the hints of pedophilia, please, or swinger parties. And we can create a new golden age of writing that just burgeons and expands with creativity and fun and fighting and everything else. Like at no point in time, if I have said something and I am criticizing such and such a work, work, and the person hears of it and comes after me, I'm just going to roll over, show my belly, and be like, look, man, any drama you make here is going to be you. But that's all right. Let's see. Bradford Walker says, mass Avengers that predate comic book superheroes is a good genre to revive for us. It allows us some mutual ground to work with, reaching out to the indie comics and people who are just killing it right now. Now, for me, I'm not very hip on comics. It is not a medium I am able to appreciate like I do movies and books. But I understand that there's a core fan base who do love it. And by the way, the masked Avengers that he's talking about are things like the Phantom and the Scarlet Pimpernel. I think he wore a mask, and Zorro and others. And I actually agree with him. I do think, but in spirit, not in literalness. Partially because the genre does move on, and the ideas move on. And what is interesting for a previous, that's all right, Yakov. Glad to see you in the chat. And what is a previous generation's catnip is kind of old garbage to us. Like the Phantom, there was a riff on it called Montmorency recently. And it got into some weird anarchy and stuff like that. I think the person lost the plot by the end of it, where Montmorency is well, I won't say, but the idea is basically that these masked Avengers, like the Phantom and others, were Batman, and then Batman is the one that survived on it because he's Batman, and Batman has evolved. Yep, the Phantom, the Shadow, Zorro, the Shadow. I keep forgetting the Shadow is one of their number. Are the heroes of old, and then it moved in to different sort of thing, to noir and to Batman and to pulp. And I think that we're we're doing something of the same now. Like a lot of people are writing space marine, space genre. And at some point in time, it'll evolve and we'll see a new way to do it and a new way of doing things. Not that I'm criticizing the old way of doing things. I'm just saying, yeah, he says if we can make it our own, we can make it new again. Absolutely. And hopefully that is something everyone works to, not just copying the old what's there. No matter how good or skillful the masters of that craft, whose kind are rarely seen in this generation, sadly, but in a new, better way for everyone. A superversive way, in fact, where we build towers for our ungrateful great-grandkids to tear down in the eternal cycle that is the culture war. But hopefully the Lord will come back before our ivory towers are torn down. All right, I'm going to let you guys go. Have a great Independence Day. America is always blessed fertilized by the blood of the patriots, but those patriots' minds are blessed by what we write. See that? I brought it back to America at the last second. God bless everyone. Have a great evening.